So our second presenter today is Darío Banegas, Darío Luis Banegas, Darío Luis Banegas, who is a senior lecturer in language education at the University of Edinburgh's Murray House School of Education and Sport. He directs the PhD education program and leads a course on second language curriculum. He's actively involved in teacher associations in Latin America and in the UK, and co-leads the language curriculum special interest group with the British Association of Applied Linguistics. His main areas of teaching and research include CLIL, language curriculum design, pre-service language teacher education, and action research. In 2023, he co-edited the Routledge Handbook of Content and Language Integrated Learning, a volume that has become a key reference in the field due to the wide range of topics and the number of researchers it brought together. Darío has worked across countries in South America, and other parts of the world, collaborating with diverse groups, which truly highlights the importance of international cooperation. I had the privilege of editing a book with him in 2024 on CLIL in South America of Routledge, and I can honestly say that few people make collaboration as smooth and as enjoyable as he does. So please join me in welcoming Darío Banegas.
Thank you. So, can you hear me? Okay, good. Well, thank you for having me in the first place. I'm going to show you now very quickly a slide, and I'll give you probably less than a minute to figure out what this is about, okay? So I should be pressing there. Some people know. Okay, anyone? Anyone would like to share what's going on here? If you could come up with a quick story, maybe?
It's about you.
Yes, it's about me. Yeah. So very quickly, was it on Tuesday? First I phoned ScotRail, and the second message was for Yolanda saying, I may have lost my passport on a train in Glasgow, so I don't think I will be able to come to this event. And so Yolanda says, que prendo una vela, prendo una vela, prendo una vela.
No te preocupes que pongo una vela.
Pongo una vela.
¿Prendiste la vela?
So I just wanted to double check, prendiste la vela. So after an hour, so I had everything, of course, you know, when I lose things, I lose everything, right? So within an hour, ScotRail phones me back saying, we found it with absolutely everything. So this is just a very quick background story. Has nothing to do with CLIL, clearly, but but it's lovely. Well, it's lovely because it's, you know, it got a good ending. It could have been waiting for it. Anyway, so I promised you a story, and this is what the story is about. So let me give you a little bit of context of about this story. And this is the province of Chubut in Patagonia, in Argentina. And I lived and worked in Esquel for, well, since between 2001 and 2019. And I was working as a teacher of English. Then I got involved with the Ministry of Education. And in another city here, Puerto Madryn, that's a beautiful city there. There was this group of teachers working in private bilingual school, and they were told kind of imposed on them that they had to do CLIL. They didn't know much about it, but they had to do it, and as teachers always do, they find a way to do what they want to do or what they're asked to do by the wonderful people at the Ministry of Education. I was part of the problem anyway. And so the teachers here, these are pseudonyms. We had, I need my glasses, we had Antonia, Beatriz, and Camilo, and they were teaching those subjects through English, biology, literature, and history. And there you can see what their educational background was. And so Beatriz had some knowledge of, how to support the language of literature, because that was part of her background, whereas for Antonia and Camilo, this was completely out of their comfort zone. And I don't know what the situation is here in the Basque Country, but at least sometimes in Argentina, when they say the content teachers find there's a literacy problem with the students, they will just simply say, bueno, que la de español o el de español lo solucione. Like, we don't teach through Spanish. I don't know what they do or what they think they're doing with the language. Anyways, so it's always the teacher of Spanish's problem. And so what happened was they got in touch with me. I was already living in Scotland. And so they said, well, we know that you've been doing stuff on this thing called CLIL. Can you help us? And I said, yeah, I don't mind. But I saw the opportunity for research. How boring is that? And so I said, yeah, I'm happy to help. I'm happy to work with you folks. But shall we do something that is beneficial for both? And so this is like the plot of what we did, what we put together. And so I said, let's do kind of two things here, because they didn't have any background on CLIL. So I said, we can do these online workshops that I would be facilitating or leading on CLIL features, lesson planning, and the language triptych. I know that many of you know about, probably everyone here knows about what the language triptych is. And I found it really helpful because the language triptych is conceptualized, well, don't. Well, it's her fault. Is this pedagogical tool for teachers. And so I said, we can use that to help you design your lessons, plan your materials, and then, support the students in a way that is meaningful, that is relevant and memorable, that, so that learning becomes memorable. And we added this focus on language awareness activities for the teachers and how to use them with their students. And this is also because the curriculum in the province of Chubut has this strong emphasis across the curriculum on metalinguistic reflection. And so I said, we can bring them all together. Then we did this online workshop on more lesson planning and action research, etc., and tutorials. So that was kind of my track. And then the other part was the teachers implementing their own action research. And based on what they did in what we called Cycle 1, and the evaluation and the feedback they got from the students and their own thinking, then they designed a second cycle to see what they could improve, but also what they could maximize. Because I don't know if it happens with teachers that sometimes we know that something is working well, but sometimes we don't know why it's working well. And I wanted to stress that because sometimes, at least in the Argentinian context, teachers are perpetually underperforming. It's never good enough. And that's a horrible message, to be constantly told, oh, you know, we should be doing more, we should be doing better. You come and do it yourself. And so I said, you know, let's look at both things, what we can improve, and let's find out how and why. But then if something is working, then let's find out why it is that it's working so that we do more of it. And we kind of translate what's happening there into other learning events, learning situations. And so, as I was working with them, we emphasized two concepts. The first one is the language triptych. And this, the image that you're looking at comes from Colin Mayer 2021, but this is way back. And so it has this focus on meaning making. This is about systemic functional linguistics and language as a semiotic system to make meaning, to construct meaning with different forms. And so the focus is on the language of learning, that is not just subject-specific vocabulary or disciplinary vocabulary, but also the grammar, the structures that will help learners construct this disciplinary discourse, if you will. Then the next one is the language for learning, and this is pretty much the language that students will need to be able to complete a task. So, for example, if, like what Teresa did before, if I'm asking students to report on what they've seen or to explain something, they need the language for that. You know, what language do you need to explain something? Or if you're comparing and contrasting or describing something, what is it that you need? Or if they're giving a presentation, what language do we need to say, you know, good morning, our presentation is about blah, 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 or we will be talking about, so that's language for learning. And then the language through learning, that you would say that this is not language that teachers would be able to plan or anticipate. And this is, to me, the result of genuine learning. You know, the typical question, teacher, ¿cómo digo esto en inglés? You know, how do I say this in English? You know, what do we call this in English? And this is as the result of learning and a very genuine need, because I want to mean that in English. So this is what we started working with, the language triptych. And also cognitive discourse functions. So, you know, these are verbal routines, you would say, where you have, you know, the combination, again, from SFL, this combination of what I want to do and how I want to do it, how I put my thinking into words, basically. So this is a classification of discourse functions. So you have categorize, define, describe, evaluate, explain, explore, and report. They're not necessarily in any order here. And it doesn't mean that this, you know, level of complexity of difficulty could travel across, because it depends on the learners, their knowledge of English, etc., etc. So I would say that all of them could be just as complex, right? Or just as easy or manageable, I don't know. And so we worked with these two concepts in mind all the time. Now, as these teachers were working, we came up with like two questions for us to explore and understand. The first one was, how do secondary school teachers use the language triptych to scaffold language learning in CLIL? So the focus was on them using the tool and what they would be doing with it. And then, can the language triptych support learners' language development and CDFs in CLIL, because that was what they wanted to do. They wanted to make sure that CLIL would work for them and primarily their learners. And therefore, they started doing what teachers do. They would be creating materials, and you might say, well, this is not rocket science, or how unoriginal is this? But remember, these are teachers who didn't have any background, any training in CLIL, any preparation, and all of a sudden they were told, oh, now you're doing CLIL, and good luck with that. So, for example, for a lesson, for a biology lesson, one of the teachers came up with an exercise of this type to show the language of learning, right? And so this is why she wanted to focus on subject-specific terms like dissolve, permeable to, nucleus, organelles, and what was the other one? Ribosome? And released. So that's what she did. But you see, for her, this was like, wow, amazing, because she wouldn't do that, or she would be expecting the learners to find out for themselves, or she would be doing this pre-teaching in a rather maybe decontextualized way, or without much support. Then another teacher, another lesson, came up with this. Again, if you have experience with teaching language or languages, this is sort of like second nature. But for a content teacher, this may be not that easy for them to think about. And so again, this was more about an example of the language for learning, because they wanted the students to produce a report, an essay. And so they say, well, if we want them to write an essay, we need to give them the structure and some sentence starters or prompts to guide them with the writing and what to do here, etc., etc. And the students were still allowed to tweak these sentence starters. And in this case, they were comparing two science fiction short stories. I don't know if you've read them, The Last Night of the World and La Nevada. They're beautiful, beautiful short stories. And what was fascinating is that the students would be reading The Last Night of the World in English y La Nevada in Español. And nobody died because of reading two things in two different languages. So I found that fascinating because, again, the teacher was sort of like challenging the idea of, the CLIL classroom as a monolingual classroom, and even though now we talk a lot about translanguaging and whatnot, sometimes that is not allowed by the institutions. So the hidden curriculum say, yeah, translanguages is fine, but not here. Parents are paying a fortune. You should be doing English only, right? And the curriculum developers could do their own thing at a conference, but translanguaging is not okay. Anyways, and then another teacher, and this is an example of one lesson that they recorded themselves in terms of the language through learning. This was a history lesson, and so the student goes, teacher, ¿cómo digo que los registreros, que yo no tenía ni idea que eran registreros, aprendí con ellos, los oligarcas llegaron a tener poder por sus lazos comerciales, pero más se beneficiaban de la ilegalidad del contrabando, algo que las grandes empresas hoy siguen haciendo, evitar pagar impuestos. O sea, los registreros did legal and illegal business with Spain, but they didn't want to pay taxes. They got richer, pero ¿cómo conecto con el hoy? And so the teacher in English says, perhaps you can say something like, which is what companies, some run by those same families, still do today, run by como que todavía pertenecen a esas familias, sus descendientes, etc. So, that was an example of the language through learning, but it required teachers' ability to identify those moments. Because, as teachers, we have the option of ignoring those moments, yeah, or pretend that you're not listening, or, as I've seen sometimes, say, oh, no, we will do that next week in lesson 48, but I have that need now, today. And another thing that this teacher would do is he would be keeping a record of all the questions, how do you say this in English, or what do we call this in English, throughout the lesson. And then by the end of the lesson, he would share all those notes with everyone in the class, so that, those individual needs would then become a learning event, so to speak, for everyone. So this is a list that he produced for everyone at the end. Now, let me share with you what they said towards the end of cycle 1. So this is, so far we are talking about what they did in cycle 1, as they were putting the language triptych into practice. And this is a student who says, teacher, quiero decir que para poder entender el poema, this was a lesson on different types of poetry y el boom sudamericano, bla, 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 de la poesía, me puse a comparar y armar una tabla y unos dibujos, y eso fue útil. But I want to say it in English. O sea, I want to say in English what I think I hice para I studied and learned. So, the students reached a point where the language triptych was helping them. They were developing their academic discourse, blah, 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 and their CDFs, but they began to feel that they wanted more. They wanted to explain their learning processes in English. And so this led to a second cycle, because this is something that the teachers noted. Because remember, I was in Glasgow, so I didn't have the opportunity to be in the classroom with them. So they would be recording their lessons, reporting, keeping notes, etc., doing action research. And so they, again, identified that moment. And so they said, okay, let's do now cycle 2, where we focus on helping the students with how to share their ways of learning, their learning strategies. And I don't think you can see there. So this is something that one of the teachers did to introduce the language needed to talk about your own learning, like the meta aspect. And so for the students, this was a survey, but they were being exposed to the language, to reconcile. I used the table, commonalities, differences. I situated. I wanted to understand. I could deconstruct. I took notes. I could create, etc., etc. And so that language began to enable these teenagers to talk about their own learning processes. And these are examples of what started to happen in class. So this wasn't just a survey, but it was, the teachers would have maybe the last 10 minutes of a lesson to talk about how the kids were learning. And again, this is something that one of the teachers recorded, audio recorded. And so they were, how are we doing with time, by the way?
That's fine.
Okay. So this is one student saying, watching videos in YouTube with subtitles in English allowed me to see a self-reproduction in movement. And this is the teacher saying, do you mean in motion? Claro, in motion, and learn specific words. Lovely, for example, yes, for example, coil, centimere, I don't know, and the queen of words, homologous. Other students laugh. Well, in my case, this is another student contributing. I used a video to make screenshots, and then I wrote my notes, a summary, my notes, algo así, next to the screenshots. I found that strategy very helpful. So this is the students using English not only to talk about content, but now the students talking about their construction of knowledge and how they would be engaging with learning, which hadn't happened during cycle 1. And this is what one of the teachers said towards the end of cycle 2. The learners are more interested, or at least they volunteer to speak more, and you can tell that they really make an effort to reflect on their learning in English. I can see them using notes or an online dictionary to organize what they want to say. One of the students told me that she was happy she could use English to say more than historical facts. So it wasn't just the content, but about learning, basically. And this is what another teacher said about the whole experience, I would say. We teachers are so used to doing CPD courses that are about implementing this or that, which is initially what I was doing with them. So, this is the language triptych, you do it. Following the expert's advice, sometimes with little space to maneuver and do our own thing. In this case, that was the action research. But with this experience, we had a chance to use the language triptych and go beyond that by asking the students to use English to reflect on their own learning processes. Isn't that amazing? And this took, mind you, a whole school year. And so, based on that experience, we revisited the triptych, and this is why we have, ta-da, the quadriptych, where you have same elements of the triptych, the language of learning, the language for learning, and the language through learning, but then we added the language about learning. And this is what then the teachers started to use even after, which is what I love the most about this kind of these kind of experiences, where the project ends, but they continue working with that, which is about sustainability, I guess, and making sure that they are in charge and they carry on and they start to work and perhaps train or mentor other teachers. And so the tool continues to be a pedagogical tool that helps the teachers, or helped these teachers, to organize their lessons, to pay attention to the kind of language or languages, let's say, that they needed to support their learners with. So it wasn't just, the long and difficult words, but also the grammar, the different mediation skills, etc., and also the thinking, the CDFs. And this idea of the kind of profiting from these teenagers demanding to do more in English. To them, that was unthinkable. Imagine teenagers. Here we go again, the same lesson. No reaction. So this is why one of the teachers found it fascinating. Do you remember what she says here? At least they volunteer to speak more. So it's not, the teacher calling them, saying, well, now you say this, now you answer question B, etc., etc. And so this is an experience of working, of enacting CLIL and practice, and how a group of teachers took ownership of the triptych and turned it into this quadriptych with the meta aspect that is not only about the language side, but also in terms of CDF. So they were not explaining or evaluating content, but this kind of new layer in terms of explaining and evaluating, which is, again, talking about their own learning and what strategies were working and not working with them. And if you want to find the cure for insomnia, you can scan this QR code, and this will take you to an article that we wrote where you will find exactly the same thing, but in more technical and academic terms. And that's me. Thank you. Oh, we've got... Wow.
We have a lot of time for questions, comments, so come on.
The QR code again?
You want to share the PowerPoint? You want to share the presentations with us?
50 euros. Of course, yeah.
You can access the article.
Yes, and it's open access, so thank you, Edinburgh.
So we have time for questions, comments, to Darío or to Teresa.
How many of you have used the language triptych? If you could raise your hand. Don't be shy. Raise your hand. Arm, otherwise. Okay, good. And any experiences or any thoughts that you would like to share with us? If you've used it, did it work?
Thank you. Thanks, Darío. No, I was thinking, because I introduced the language triptych to my master students who are going to become secondary school teachers. So they're going to become secondary school teachers of English, but they have a CLIL course, because we think it's important for them to know about what their content colleagues are working on and try to work collaboratively, because of a number of schools in Madrid which are bilingual, and also because it's important also for English teachers to incorporate some of the, content, meaning-oriented work that content teachers do. Anyway, so I was thinking that the fourth layer, or the fourth angle, would be really interesting for teacher training, for teacher development, not only to work with the students, but also for teacher training programs on CLIL. So that, particularly with content teachers, this idea of communities of practice and teachers be able to, at a meta level, I'm going to be talking a little bit about that in my talk, being able to verbalize, the learning processes, and even technical, or not technical, but some conceptual aspects that have to do with CLIL. And then, I was thinking also not only with the students, but also with teachers.
Yeah. No, I think that's, I don't know if that is happening at the moment, but for the teacher, it was again an aha moment, and a moment of saying, oh, this is coming from the demand from the students, but also then they realized that this was again an opportunity for critical thinking, but not critical thinking about facts or what's happening elsewhere, but critical thinking for the learners to talk about themselves, to, as you said, to be able to verbalize and articulate their own thinking processes, Why is it that I'm learning? Or what's making me learn? And how can I put that into words in English? So, yeah. No, that's, so I'm hoping that, teacher education programs do something along these lines, yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. So, first of all, that's a fabulous example, I think, of how any kind of theory needs to be owned, and it needs to be context-specific. But if it's not owned by teachers, it's meaningless. And I've also got a confession to make, which I think might be, so when we were working with the triptych in the first place, we were working actually with Spanish teachers, and we didn't really know what language through learning meant. But we knew that it had to be a lot more than the starting point, which at the time was many teachers were really good at doing language of learning. So that was okay. Language for learning wasn't evident, but we knew it was about an awful lot more than that. So that's where through came in. And we didn't really know exactly what through meant, to be absolutely frank. So yeah. Confession from Doe Coyle.
Okay.
And it's only more recently, as we've been developing much more literacies and deeper learning, really, that is where through comes from. That's where through is leading us to. And it's just great to see that that simple ideas are really important to being transformed in whatever way. So thank you.
Thank you for the triptych. Because yeah, exactly. This. If we go back to, hang on a minute, to this one. If we look at what the student is constructing verbally and orally in Spanish, see, and this was the language, you say, through learning. ¿Cómo digo que los registreros, los oligarcas llegaron a tener poder por sus lazos comerciales, pero más se beneficiaban de la ilegalidad, del contrabando? Algo que las grandes empresas hoy siguen haciendo, evitar pagar impuestos. So it was even amazing in Spanish. And so there was this real need. And so I would say, yeah, that was, this example of going beyond the language of and for learning, because this is not something that the teacher had planned or had envisaged. So it was the knowledge construction process that sort of triggered this discourse from the student. So absolutely, how that helped probably, yeah, show an example of deeper learning. So this was the student saying, no, this is what I want to say, what I want to mean through English. Yeah. Any more questions, comments? This lady at the back.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Banegas, for your interesting talk and for the discovery of a new element in the planning of CLIL lessons. My name is Ruth Milla and I work in the University of the Basque Country. Yes.
Pleasure.
Okay, so I teach, I am a teacher trainer actually, and I teach future teachers in primary education. So my question is in this line because it's very different, the quality of the cognitive abilities and level and everything in a secondary student and in our future or their future students. So my students actually struggle with when they are planning CLIL lessons, pretend lessons, they struggle with language through learning. So I wonder if adding, I was thinking of my future lessons, yes, so if adding this new element is really worthy for primary school lessons. What do you think about this?
Well, I don't know, because this was only done with secondary school students, with teenagers. But I don't see the harm, because, kids are kids, they're not stupid. And they could construct very, complex ideas. And this amazing project being carried out in Glasgow with primary school kids doing philosophy. And the questions they come up with are just, mind-blowing. Yeah, they're just amazing. So I think it would be possible to do this with, teacher training and primary school kids, to enable them to construct and to articulate complex ideas about their own learning. And it is something that I've seen teachers doing anyways, when, they ask students to say, well, ¿cómo hiciste esto? Contanos cómo lo hiciste, contanos cómo hiciste, o qué aprendiste, or I don't know. But I would say, yeah, it is possible, and it also has the potential of enabling future teachers to be more invested in what's happening in the classroom, because for these teachers, it also meant them being able to identify this learning moment. This was gold dust. And again, as I said before, the option was ignoring them completely or saying, oh, okay, this is genuine learning happening as we speak, let's exploit it. And I would say, this is a skill that all educators might want to develop. Because, all their questions were really genuine questions. And in some cases, and that was really interesting, but it's not in this paper, sometimes with pedagogical knowledge, we run the risk of leading students to inaccurate information because we are trying to make it teachable and learnable, and so we might be oversimplifying things to such an extent that what they are learning might be incorrect. And that happened in the biology lesson. And the teacher knew that the knowledge they were constructing was not accurate, but it was because of this, pedagogical side. And some of the students would realize, and then they would start to question whether that was actually the case. And there was a bit of Spanish at the beginning, but then they would want to challenge the teacher in English with exceptions or with things, and that was, again, a miracle. Oh no, it was beautiful. I wish I had been one of the teachers, But again, going back to your question, it could be done with anyone, I guess. Just a matter of trying.
Any more questions? Yeah. Okay. Enrico?
But maybe people at the back cannot.
Yeah, so, oops. I wanted to ask, because first, by the way, I love your presentation, both of you. I think you're amazing. So my question is, first, you mentioned that the Argentinian authorities are still a little bit reluctant to monolingual approaches in education. So my question is whether you think that your approach can thrive through the Argentinian system, in the education system, and whether it can become mainstream in the future.
So one thing is what's, policy as text, what's written there, and I've authored some of the curricula still in use in the country. But of course, that's, to me, that's amazing. But that's text. That's dead word to me. The problem is with implementation sometimes, and the contexts and the limitations of the curriculum as text. Maybe teachers, regardless of what the curriculum says, because these are not prescriptive documents, they might be more inclined to do translanguaging or, multilingual TESOL, multilingual CLIL in state schools. But remember, in this case, it wasn't the official authorities. This was a bilingual school, so a private school, where even though they need to comply with the official curriculum, they can do, they have their own autonomy, so they can do their own thing. And so doing their own thing meant no Spanish, no other languages here, let's just do English. And in this case, they began to be more welcoming after the project. But I must say that, particularly two of the teachers are experienced teachers, and they said to me, well, we don't need to tell them everything we do in the classroom, do we? And so it was also a matter of teacher agency, and say, I know what I'm doing, I know what's good for my students, because if I'm a professional, then this is my informed decision. But in this case, the school authorities again said, yeah, fine with translanguaging, because now we can see that this is helping. And it also, but that happened later, that then they would brand their school as a school that was doing research with the University of Edinburgh. And so then that would potentially attract more students. So when they saw the business side, oh yes, we love translanguaging now. Did I answer your question, by the way? Because sometimes I do not. No.
Thank you very much for the most interesting presentation. And I have a question, it's a bit more maybe technical. Did teachers who participated reflect on how they address all four aspects of this model? Because in my mind it might sometimes overlap or blend.
Oh, yes.
And did they refer to using this tool as tick boxes of all four aspects, or generally they would understand it as a whole realized in the classroom? I don't know if I'm clear with my question.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Initially, they would use the triptych as a guide to say, yeah, I want to make sure that I do the language of learning. But then they would realize that there was this overlap, that they were doing them all at the same time. But nevertheless, it would help them focus, because at some point, one of them said, and this is not in the article, otherwise that would be a novel instead, yes, we are doing them all together. But initially, we start from a kind of specific point, because their thinking was, had we done this as a too holistic, we wouldn't have been perhaps covering all the elements, because it was like too broad, too holistic, you would say. But yeah, no, there was this overlap, and they were fine with that, because it was, to them it meant, making sure that there were opportunities for subject-specific terms, general academic language, not just the written word, but also speaking or grammar, because they also wanted to pay attention to form as well as meaning. Because they said, form is just as important, because if I'm only focusing on meaning, but then the grammar is too inaccurate, there will be no meaning, or the meaning will be too obscured and difficult to be, to be understood by your interlocutors. But in the end, they did overlap. Yeah, they did. Yeah. Okay.
For questions, comments, no? So I think we can go for coffee now. Yes, at the end of the conversation.
Well, thank you very much.